What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So, I don't go to Reddit very often, but I was on r/Velo the other day, which is a subreddit for a community of competitively minded amateur cyclists. And I realized that there are a lot of amazing questions on this subreddit with not many very good answers to those questions. So I wanted to have a little bit of fun today, sort through the most popular questions and answer them as a Category 1 competitive cyclist. Let's dive into it. Semi-Pro Ice Cream 93 asks, what does corners on rails mean or feel like? I often see this when describing a bike on corners and descents. People seem to enjoy the feeling, but I literally feel like the bike is going to slide out from underneath me. That's not it. So this is a good question. I love this question because there is a feeling that you're after. It does exist. And I feel it in crits when I'm really in the zone, especially on that last corner of a crit, which I always say first to the last corner in a bike race usually wins. And part of it is you really have to understand your equipment. More specifically, you have to understand the limitations of your equipment, because when you're cornering at this aggressive of an angle, you are right at the limits of your equipment. In fact, if you were to pedal, your pedal would strike the ground and you would crash in a big old heap. This is called a pedal strike. So you have to understand your equipment really well. You have to have race-specific equipment for this type of cornering to be possible. But when you get it, and after many hours on the bike, descending, cornering, and doing races and practice races, you will eventually get this feeling of cornering on rails. And the best way I can describe it is you are loading your bike. It almost feels like my feet in the pedals, my butt on the saddle, and my hands on the bars are pushing on the bike. Especially that outside leg is pushing really hard into the pedal as I'm making this corner, and I'm just gripping the ground. Like that extra weight is really loading the tires and really increasing that contact patch where the rubber on the tire meets the ground. And it's a wonderful feeling. It doesn't feel like the bike's about to slide underneath you, as you put it. It feels controlled, and it feels like you're about to win a bike race. What is the best app or plan for training 15 plus hours per week at a high level? I'm 23 years old. I just switched from elite level rowing to cycling, hoping to maximize my performance throughout the spring and summer. I currently do 3 group rides per week and train alone the other 4 days. How do I put myself in the best possible position? My kind of knee-jerk answer is slow and steady. This athlete comes from rowing. I know a lot of really good cyclists. Brennan Wirtz, my former teammate, who come from competitive rowing, have a fantastic and successful transition to competitive cycling. But that doesn't mean you can just dive in at 15 plus hours per week. And this is because although rowers have off the charts cardiovascular and endurance fitness, they don't have those cycling specific adaptations to the muscle groups and connective tissues often associated with riding a bike. If you are really trying to dive in and be fast this upcoming season, start with a lot of zone 2. Like seriously, like 14 hours of those 15 hours are zone 2. And ideally you would be doing these zone 2 rides with a like-minded group of other disciplined cyclists who know how to actually stay in zone. Skip the big group rides for now because first of all, they never ride at endurance pace, trust me. And what you need is to develop those pack riding skills and avoid stress and overuse injuries associated with going too hard too soon. Zone 2 is between 55 and about 70% of your FTP. So get a power meter, establish your FTP, which is going to require a 20-minute test, and then do a lot of volume at around the 55 to 70% of your FTP, and make sure that you avoid any repetitive stress injuries. Okay, do you guys remember the Insta360 video I made a while back where I complained? I said, this is a great camera, but it's hard to mount it to your bike, and they should sell that piece that mounts it to the front of your bike. Well, they listened to me, and they came out with a couple of new mounting options in order to make it as easy as possible to get that really cool looking 360 footage. Why 2, you're wondering? Let me show you. If you have a more traditional setup, that's what this one is for. These 2 bolts right there, bink, they just drop in right in the front there, and off you go. Super easy. If you have a fancy pants setup, like this one-piece bar and stem over here, That's what this one's for. Slots in right underneath, and away you go. Let me show you how easy it is to set up. You screw in the camera in the front here with that piece. They listen to me with that piece. It's just this easy. And then you have a weapon that you can, I'm just kidding, sorry. You have, with your computer, look at that, bam, you have the setup. There it is. It gets screwed into the front of your bike right there. There's even an accessory if you still want to keep your light on there or whatever. And the footage ends up looking like this. Thanks to Insta360 for sponsoring this video. Now back to the content. Okay, next up, Guitar Alternative 336 asks, do you run cheaper / more durable off-season wheels? And then he goes on and asks about using carbon wheels during race day and then alloy wheels during training. And in short, the answer is yes. I absolutely love this idea of having a set of training wheels and then a set of race wheels if you can afford it. If you can only afford one, go with the race setup, obviously. But the benefit of having two sets is there's a few benefits actually. The first obvious one is you don't have to train on something that's high performing. So you can get something that is bomb-proof. Like you said, bomb-proof alloy wheels is fantastic for training. In fact, once you remove these heavy alloy non-aerodynamic wheels from your bike and you put on like the super racy aerodynamic light setup, you're gonna feel this immediate performance boost. But the other benefit is alloy wheels with hard-wearing tires are gonna be great for winter training out in the elements. You're out in the rain, you're out in the gravel, maybe you're doing some crazy exploring. You're not so concerned about your race day setup. And then when it comes to race day, you swap out the wheels. It takes just 1 minute. You don't have to do any tire swaps or anything like that. You have lighter, more aerodynamic carbon wheels with high-performing tires. I always recommend Continental GP 5000s. There's a lot of really good high-performance race tires on the market. And then when it comes to the training setup, put on the Armadillos or the Four Seasons or something that is really hard-wearing because you don't have to be so concerned about bringing some less performing setup to race day. Now, this is where it gets a little interesting because I'm going to caveat that whole thing with what I find myself doing is when I'm at the peak of race season, let's say June, July, August, like peak crit racing here in the Northern Hemisphere, I find myself setting the training wheels aside and only using the race day setup for two reasons. The first one is my rides are shorter and higher in intensity, so I'm not so concerned about putting the wear and tear on the race day setup, so I can put the training wheels aside. But the bigger reason is, and this gets back to the previous question actually, is understanding your equipment. If you're only using the race day setup on race day, you don't know exactly where that limit is, where your tire's gonna grip the road and where it's gonna lose control. There's a big difference between the race day and the training day setup. So I find myself doing more of the race setup, even on training rides during peak season. So good question. Okay, another one about training here from Do Rush 9305. When do you skip a session? My training plan is a 5-hour-long ride today, and I am not feeling up for it. Tired and unmotivated. I could probably push through, but I would not enjoy it. What are signs to look for to miss a workout? Obviously injured or ill, but at what point do you say the tiredness is too much and just not a good day to train? Another excellent question. If you don't feel motivated to go out and train, that's not necessarily an indication that you are over fatigued, that you're overworked. Things that I look for in myself and my athletes contained in the Masterclass 2 is you're looking at things like your resting heart rate, your heart rate variability. These are things with a smartwatch, they can just tell you, but also with resting heart rate, you wake up in the morning, you just check your pulse. If you have an elevated heart rate from your baseline, this is generally an indication that you are over fatigued. Now, people talk about burnout and overtraining, and my mantra is there is no such thing as overtraining, only under resting. So there are certainly days where I have a workout and I'm like, ooh, like, you know, VO2 max, 5 minute by 5 VO2 max, like this is gonna hurt. And pushing through it sometimes, as long as my body is telling me with things like resting heart rate that it's a good day to train, then it's going to be beneficial. Now, if you skip a day let's just say you are sick, or let's say you decide you are really not motivated to ride today. For whatever reason, you skip a day, it's not that big of a deal. Contained in most training plans are sort of like off days or endurance days where you're doing an hour, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours of very chill zone 2 endurance riding. You can swap a day. That's no problem. Now let's say, I'm gonna take this a step further because the follow-up question is gonna be like, well, what if I'm away for a week? The general rule of thumb is if you're away from training for a week, go back 2 weeks in the plan. So if you're in base 4, block 3 in the master class, and you are 3 weeks into the plan and you have to skip a week because you're going on vacation or work is pulling you away, you have to go back 2 additional weeks and then you're going to be back on track. Don't neglect the base rides and the zone 2 rides. So another good question, hope that helps. All right, we got another one by Cyclist. Pete asks, how many carbs per hour is normal? I've heard a lot of different things about carbs per hour consumed during rides. I'm wondering what you all do, race days, long weekend rides, blah, blah, blah. So this is a very common question. I get asked all the time because I think there's a misunderstanding about carb intake. And I want to start by saying my answer is for competitive cyclists looking to increase their performance. And that I'm going to explain what works for me and the cyclists I ride with. I'm not your nutritionist, so with that out of the way, generally, more is better. There are specific cases where you want to restrict your carbs, but for the type of racing that I do, and 99% of people, you are trying to take in like almost as much as you can. I think that the general recommendation is to start with about 80 grams of carbs per hour, maybe 70, 80, something like that. If you're a larger rider, a little bit more, and then see how your body responds. You will know if you take in too many because you'll feel bloated and you will feel like you don't want to eat anymore. But here's the misunderstanding. It is almost impossible to overfuel a ride. And that is because the rate at which we are burning calories when we're riding a bike far outweighs the amount that we can take in. Our stomach can only take in so many carbs. Even though we are drinking the fast-absorbing, fast-acting glucoses and fructoses, it is still no match for how quickly we can burn that energy. So you are trying to replace it and replenish it as quickly as you can. And that's not just for that ride. So if you're out doing a zone 2 ride, a lot of my athletes are like, yeah, but I only did a 3-hour zone 2 ride. I only need like 1 bottle of mix. And it's like, well, maybe you can finish that ride. A, you're gonna feel like shit when you're done with that ride, and you're gonna probably eat up everything in the fridge. But B, you are thinking about the next day and the next ride because guys, you're in it for the long haul, right? Part of getting better as a cyclist is the consistency. In fact, a huge part of training success has to do with consistency. So you're always thinking about the next ride and the next ride. And that's why you're fueling even on those zone 2 rides. So I take in about 100, maybe even 120 grams of carbs per hour when it's race day. And it's only slightly less than that during training days, simply because I'm not really pushing the limits of my stomach on a zone 2 ride, but it's still something like 80 to 100 on a zone 2 ride. So eat those carbs. Okay, we'll do one more here because this one looks kind of fun. This is by Appropriate Care 1731. Does anyone here successfully race without power metrics? It's not necessary. I mean, I raced for, God, how long? I raced for 9 years, 10 years almost, without power at all. So yes, you can train, you can race without power, obviously. The reason power is like the ultimate tool for training is because it is absolute. For those who don't know, a power meter is a tool on your bike that measures the amount of force that you are physically pushing into your bike. Because if you use something like speed, well, are you going uphill? Are you going downhill? Is there a headwind? Are you getting a good draft? There's too many factors. If you're doing something like heart rate, same problem. How good was your sleep last night? You know, how stressed are you at work? All of these things contribute to a variable heart rate, which isn't great for performance. Power, on the other hand, is power. It doesn't care if you're going uphill. It doesn't care if you had a bad day yesterday. It tells you exactly how you're doing. The good part about that is you can compare an FTP test, a functional threshold power test, for example, from one training block to the next. Did that last 6-week training block work? Yes, it did by 2%. No, it didn't. I'm still the same. Something like that. So power is an incredibly, incredibly important training tool. I cannot stress that enough. And when I started riding, they cost about $2,000. That's the reason I didn't buy one. But now you can get them for like 300 bucks. And they're super easy to install. So I recommend that to everybody. But racing without power metrics, clearly this is a no-brainer. You can do that. Because on race day, power doesn't really matter. In fact, you're doing the opposite. On training day, you're trying to use as much power as you possibly can. On race day, you're trying to use as the least amount of power you possibly can. I've had athletes, especially newer athletes, who obsess over it and they are staring at their computer. And I have taken their Garmin off of their bike. I've paired it with their power meter. I've paired it with their heart rate strap, and I put it in their pocket. I'm like, don't even look at it. Just race your race the best you can. I will sometimes change the page so I'm not looking at it if I'm distracted by it. So you don't need it to race. It really helps to train. Hope that helps. Okay, last one here, because it looks like a really fun one to answer, is from user I'm only here to creep. I'm only here to creep asks, what is the sketchiest crit you've ever raced? I have raced a lot of really sketchy crits. A criterium is a short course. It's like Formula One for bikes is the way I've described it. It's a short course, a lot of corners. You have to navigate a complicated course in a big group of people. And they are inherently sketchy or dangerous, especially if you're not good at riding with others. So as a crit racer for 16 years, having done thousands of races, I can promise you that I've done at least one sketchy crit, which happens to be the exact number of laps everyone was trying to complete at Lake Bluff Intelligentsia in 2018. You see, normally Lake Bluff is a 6-corner course with a decent enough pavement that races really fast and aggressive, but on this particular day, we were all lining up and it just started raining. Rain was on the forecast, but that first rain, you guys, that first rain creates that little slick on the top of the pavement, and we didn't even get through the first lap. I think there were like 3 crashes on the first lap. More than half the field went to the pit to swap out, to get bandaged up, to change wheels, to get a new bike, and it was a disaster. It's the first time I've ever seen this happen. The official looked at the field, looked at how in pieces it was, and he's like, okay, stop. Everybody stop. We're gonna restart this race. Everyone just get fixed up. Everyone who's in the pit, take your time, get bandaged up, get everything ready. Whoever wants to continue racing, line up again, we're gonna do it again. It's the first time I've ever seen that. That was probably the sketchiest crit I've ever raced. Thanks for watching, guys. This was a ton of fun. Hopefully you like this type of content. We do have more racing content coming up, so stay tuned for that. Catch you in the next one.